Welcome back, Nightmare Hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the HOA Nightmare Files, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest HOA nightmare hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video.
You know, there's a certain peace that comes with retirement. A quiet rhythm you settle into after decades of chasing deadlines and fighting battles. For me, Arthur Sterling, after a career in federal investigation, that rhythm was my sanctuary. My home in Willow Creek Estates, a community I'd lived in for nearly 40 years, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the quiet culmination of a life well lived. My garden, the morning paper on the porch, the familiar faces of my neighbors, all seniors like myself, many of us having grown old together here. It was, simply put, perfect. Or so I thought. Then came Brenda Thorne, the new HOA president. She swept in like a poorly mixed cocktail, all glitter and no substance, promising a modernized community. Her smile was plastered on, a cheap veneer over a house of cards. At the first community meeting she chaired, her voice, syrupy sweet, announced what she called a vital accessibility and safety audit. She spoke of new federal guidelines, of ensuring the well-being of all residents. It sounded almost noble, if you didn't know any better, if you didn't have a nose for BS like I did. The auditors arrived swiftly. Not the kind you'd expect from a reputable firm, mind you. These were two burly guys in ill-fitting polos, brandishing clipboards like weapons, from a company called Elite Home Solutions. They moved through the community with the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, and the findings were, shall we say, consistent. Every single senior's home was deemed deficient. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet lady who barely left her porch, was told her perfectly functional ramp was not up to code and needed to be replaced at a cost of $15,000. Mr. Davies, whose home had wider doorways installed years ago for his late wife, was informed his were too narrow and required structural modifications for $20,000. My own home, which I'd meticulously maintained and updated for genuine accessibility over the years, received an estimate for nearly $30,000 for insufficient railings and bathroom reconfigurations. It was ridiculous, the sheer arrogance of it. The estimates were astronomical, easily dwarfing the annual incomes of many of my fixed-income neighbors. And the notices that followed? They came thick and fast, with strict deadlines, threats of escalating fines, and the chilling mention of property liens. Brenda Thorne held follow-up meetings, playing the role of the sympathetic leader, clucking her tongue about the unfortunate necessity of these upgrades. But her eyes, cold and calculating, gave away the game. She'd say things like, "Perhaps this community isn't suitable for everyone anymore," or "We must move forward, even if it means difficult decisions." The subtext was clear. Get with the program or get out. Panic rippled through the older residents. Many had nowhere else to go. This was their last stop. I heard hushed conversations about selling, about moving in with adult children, about breaking decades of roots for fear of financial ruin. That's when my old instincts, dormant for years, began to hum. 30 years of chasing down fraud, unraveling conspiracies, and exposing corruption. It wasn't just a job. It was how my mind worked. And something was very, very wrong here. First, the federal guidelines. I spent a day on the phone, leveraging a few old contacts. Turns out, there were no such sweeping new federal guidelines forcing mandatory, costly accessibility upgrades on private homes. Not in this manner, not with these specifics. Brenda Thorne had pulled that out of thin air, a fabricated decree to lend false legitimacy to their scheme. Then, Elite Home Solutions. Why were they the only approved contractor? A quick search revealed they were a brand new company, incorporated just 6 months ago, with no significant prior projects or established reputation. Suspicion began to solidify into certainty. This wasn't an audit, it was extortion. My quiet investigation began. I requested every single document the HOA had related to this audit. Meeting minutes, financial records, every single contract with Elite Home Solutions. I spread them out on my dining room table, a mountain of paper that looked like bureaucratic chaos, but was to me a roadmap. I cross-referenced dates, names, and figures, looking for the threads. I started talking to my neighbors, not just as a concerned friend, but as an investigator. I compared their audit findings, noting the arbitrary nature of the deficiencies and the wildly inconsistent, yet always exorbitant pricing. It was clear this wasn't about safety. It was about squeezing every last penny, or pushing them to a breaking point. I found an ally, a younger resident named Michael, an accountant who had been apathetic about HOA politics until he got his own assessment for a supposedly non-compliant patio railing. He was angry about the numbers, not the principle, but that was enough for me. We met for coffee, and I laid out my initial findings. He agreed to help, providing me with a fresh perspective and, more importantly, a digital trail. He knew how to dig through the HOA's online portal and find things most people missed. Next, the digital trail. Brenda Thorne, Elite Home Solutions. I delved into their corporate filings, their online presence, what little they had. It wasn't long before I found the first crack, a familiar surname among the silent partners of Elite Home Solutions. Thorne. Not Brenda directly, but her nephew, a young man with a history of shady business dealings. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was a family enterprise, designed to fleece the community. But the situation escalated quickly. Before I could present my findings, Brenda made a power move. One morning, Mrs. Henderson called me, her voice trembling. A crew from Elite Home Solutions had shown up with a bulldozer and were starting to tear up her porch, claiming pre-remediation was required before the official start date. I grabbed my phone and my cane and got over there as fast as I could. I found Mrs. Henderson weeping on her lawn as 2 men in hard hats stood over the wreckage. I walked up to the foreman, my voice calm but firm. I asked, "Do you have a signed work order from the homeowner?" He looked at me, then at his clipboard, and stammered. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I recited the local statute on home renovation permits, the specific section on property trespass, and the legal definition of criminal mischief. His bravado crumbled.
I told him he had 10 minutes to clear his crew and equipment off the property, or the next call would be to the police and the district attorney's office. He chose the former. Brenda had crossed a line, and she had just handed me a key piece of evidence. Back at my home, Michael and I went through the emails I'd found, forwarded accidentally to a public-facing HOA email address between Brenda and her nephew. They detailed the kickback percentages for each audit contract. They spoke of optimizing the assessments, of streamlining the process, cynical euphemisms for maximizing their illicit profits. I found inflated invoices from Elite Home Solutions showing massive markups on materials and labor that were more phantom than real. And the true motive, baldly stated in one email, was to accelerate turnover in the community, implying they intended to buy up the devalued properties through shell corporations. They weren't just extracting money, they were attempting to orchestrate a mass eviction by financial means. I remembered a quote, something that resonated deeply with the situation. "There is no crueler tyranny than that which is perpetuated under the shield of law and in the name of justice." Brenda Thorne was doing precisely that, using the veneer of HOA authority and fabricated regulations to enact her cruel scheme. The next HOA meeting was set. Brenda Thorne, beaming, was ready to finalize the latest round of assessments, oblivious to the storm gathering. She had a presentation ready, full of charts and graphs designed to overwhelm and confuse. She called the meeting to order, her voice echoing with false authority. I waited until she opened the floor for questions, then I slowly, deliberately rose from my seat. There was a hush. I began, calmly, methodically. "Madam President, I have a few questions regarding the recent accessibility and safety audit." She nodded, a patronizing smile on her face. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, happy to clarify any concerns. My first question pertains to the new federal guidelines you cited. Could you please provide the specific legislative acts or federal mandates that necessitate these sweeping and frankly unprecedented home modifications?" Her smile faltered. "They are industry standards, Mr. Sterling, evolving regulations." "Indeed. I've consulted with former colleagues, experts in federal compliance. They found no such mandates. In fact, many of these deficiencies would be considered upgrades, not requirements, and certainly not enforceable by a private HOA. A murmur went through the room. Brenda's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking slightly. She tried to deflect, talking about the importance of safety. "And how does one ensure safety with a company that performs unapproved, destructive work?" I asked, holding up my phone. "I have video evidence of Elite Home Solutions illegally attempting to demolish Mrs. Henderson's property. I also have a notarized quote from a licensed, reputable contractor for the same work, which is less than a tenth of the price you've been quoting." The room erupted in a storm of gasps and angry whispers. Brenda's face went white. She pounded the gavel. "Order! Order! This is slander. This is not the appropriate forum for these accusations." "Then let's make it the appropriate forum," I countered, placing a stack of documents on the table. "My second point concerns Elite Home Solutions, an interesting name for a company with no discernible track record before 6 months ago. Could you explain why this company, and only this company, was selected for such a critical and costly community-wide project? Was there a competitive bidding process?" She stammered. "They came highly recommended. They offered comprehensive services." "Comprehensive, perhaps, but at what cost?" I asked. "My analysis of their invoices shows markups of 3, 4, even 500% on standard materials. Materials, I might add, that often aren't even used. Mrs. Gable's new ramp for $15,000, for example, consists of a few boards nailed over her existing perfectly functional ramp. The cost of materials for that work barely reached $500. Gasps erupted. People started whispering furiously. "And then there's the ownership of Elite Home Solutions." I hold up printouts of the corporate filings. "The silent partner listed here, a Mr. Jeremy Thorne. Am I mistaken, Madam President, or is Mr. Jeremy Thorne your nephew?" The room exploded. Brenda Thorne's face went white. The veneer shattered. "This is outrageous!" she shrieked, her voice losing its syrupy sweetness, replaced with a raw, furious edge. "Slander! Lies! The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable," I stated, looking directly at her. "I have here, Madam President, copies of emails detailing kickback percentages from Elite Home Solutions to you. Emails discussing how this audit would accelerate turnover in our community. In plain language, this was never about accessibility. It was about forcing out the long-term residents, the seniors on fixed incomes, by burdening them with impossible costs. It was about devaluing properties so you and your associates could snap them up cheaply under the guise of community improvement." The outrage was palpable. My neighbors, once fearful and confused, now rallied. "She tried to evict us," someone shouted. "This is criminal," another yelled. The meeting devolved into a cacophony of accusations aimed squarely at Brenda Thorne. "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "We chose not to do nothing." An emergency vote of no confidence was swiftly called. Brenda Thorne, stripped of her false authority, was removed from her position, humiliated and exposed. The HOA board, many of whom had been either complicit or intimidated, quickly dissolved. Legal action was initiated not just by myself, but by a coalition of my neighbors against Brenda Thorne and Elite Home Solutions. The accessibility audit was immediately canceled, and all previous fines were rescinded. In the aftermath, our community began to heal. The days following the meeting were a whirlwind of activity. The police came, seizing Brenda's personal and HOA files, and the district attorney's office opened an official fraud investigation. I spent hours with them, providing them with all the evidence Michael and I had collected. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Without a board, a vacuum was created. The community was in turmoil. But where Brenda had sown division, now there was a chance for unity. A meeting was called by a handful of concerned neighbors, not to fight, but to rebuild. They asked me to help them, to use my experience to guide them. I was reluctant. I was a retired man who just wanted his peace. But a good friend of mine had always said, "Some people have a personality like an unskippable ad, pervasive and increasingly irritating." Brenda was gone, but her influence still lingered. It was a job that needed doing. We formed a new interim board, a diverse group of long-standing residents led by Michael and myself. Our first task was to create a new, transparent set of bylaws. We scrapped the old, vague rules that had been so easily manipulated. We established clear, fair procedures for everything from contractor bidding to fine appeals. The process was slow and painstaking, but it was a crucial step towards rebuilding trust. The legal fallout was also a long road. I sat with a pro bono lawyer, a former colleague from my federal days, and we laid out the case. We had her for wire fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. The evidence was airtight. Brenda and her nephew were both indicted. Watching her face in court, stripped of her power and her expensive clothes, her perfectly coiffed hair a mess, was a stark reminder of how quickly the mighty can fall. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the community itself. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak were now speaking up. The Elite Home Solutions signs were torn down. The community garden, once a source of endless petty violations, flourished under resident care. The focus shifted from oppressive rules to genuine community well-being. The community pooled their money to help Mrs. Henderson and others repair the damage done to their homes. I'd often sit on my porch in the evening, my garden thriving, and watch the kids play on a new, genuinely accessible park that the new board had built. The community was different, better. It was a stark reminder. Power, even the tiny insignificant power of an HOA presidency, can corrupt if left unchecked. But when ordinary people, especially those who know how to meticulously follow a trail of deceit, stand up armed with facts and determination, even the most entrenched suburban tyrant can be toppled. My peaceful retirement was interrupted, yes, But what emerged was a stronger, more united community. And that, my friends, was a victory worth every bit of the disruption. As the old saying goes, the fox surveys its surroundings with the cunning intelligence of a seasoned trickster. But in the end, the fox always gets caught.